Welcome to Regal BBQs, Saskatchewan's premier barbecue manufacturer. All information presented in this orientation presentation can be found in more detail in the employee handbook and in the Regal Safety Training Manual, which is based off the regulations and CSA guidelines. The health and safety policy for Regal. Regal is fully committed to the health and safety of our staff. Management will provide and maintain a safe and healthy work environment in accordance with legal requirements and exceed those requirements. All employees are responsible for avoiding and minimizing incidents, so not just the safety officer is responsible for safety. All injuries are preventable and predictable. Working safely is a condition of employment. Safety is the direct responsibility of all persons in the facilities. At this point, I would like to review the workers' legislated rights. So workers have the right to know of existing hazards in the workplace, and all workplaces are going to have their own specific hazards, as is the case with Regal. Then, after we tell you what your right to know and what potential hazards there are, you have the right to protect yourselves. So in accordance with that, we handle chemicals at Regal. So therefore, we follow WMIS, and then we teach the workers about the individual chemicals that they will be handling. These are the pictogram for WMIS 2015. That'll be in a separate course, but really quickly, the exclamation point is a new symbol, as is the dead fish, and is health hazards, which is how I can remember as Cancer Man. You'll have also the right to participate in the identification of hazards. As a new employee, you're coming with a different viewpoint than our current staff. If you see things that are unsafe, please report them to your supervisor. You also can report unsafe things to the health and safety officer or to the occupational health and safety committee. Kind of how things work in most companies is the board or senior management make decisions, but the people on the floor are actually the ones getting hurt. So we want to make sure concerns from floor staff and office staff are going up towards management to make sure their decisions aren't impacting workers' health and safety. Workers' legislated rights. Most workers will recall this one, the most of all the legislated rights. You have the right to refuse a dangerous act. So something that's not normal for the job. So if you were hired as a production welder, it would not be normal for you to paint barbecues. Something that would normally stop work. So like a tornado or a power outage. We're not going to make you work in the dark by candlelight or something like that. A situation in which the worker isn't properly trained or experienced, so operating a crane, operating a forklift without training. And then from the Employment Act down here, SEA is the Saskatchewan Employment Act 2013. What if situation? So if you ask your worker supervisor, what if this happens? What if that happens? That is not a work refusal. That's just clarifying what the job is and how to do it safely, which we encourage. So again, situations where it's out of the norm is kind of where you have the right to refuse. Work refusal procedure is when you feel unsafe and you feel obligated to work in a situation, tell a supervisor what your concerns are. If you don't feel that your concerns have been addressed by the supervisor, investigation team will be created with the occupational health and safety officer and the co-chairs of the occupational health and safety committee, and then they'll review the situation with an emergency meeting. If you're still not feel safe after that meeting, we can call the occupational health and safety officer from the province and then we can see what they say, and then no reprisals will be taken if this occurs. Management responsibilities. So the management of the company, they have a leadership role. They have to provide the resources to make sure the health and safety system work. They have to make sure that there's policies, procedures, and rules that are developed and enforced to identify, control, and eliminate hazards. We have to ensure our facilities and equipment are maintained in good working order at all times. And we have to ensure that workers and supervisors are getting proper safety training, which includes this orientation. Supervisor responsibilities. All supervisors are required to take the supervisor safety course from WorkSafe Saskatchewan, but they also have to, during their shift, ensure the policies, procedures, and rules are followed within the area of their responsibility. They have to ensure workers have appropriate health and safety training to perform their duties competently, and then they have to report all incidents and complete incident reports to make sure that that's being timely addressed, so we don't have situations that are not being rectified, so future incidents are occurring. Workers' responsibilities: ensure policies, procedures, and rules are being followed, to inspect, use, and maintain all personal protective equipment, so again, PPE, to use any and all safeguards, so not putting your hand under grills, or to take reasonable precautions for their own health and safety and for others, so you have to make sure you're safe. Report any hazardous conditions, procedures, equipment operations, or material concerns immediately. So if you see something that's unsafe, tell someone. Don't just go for coffee break kind of thing. Report all injuries as soon as practical, no matter how small. To use all tools, equipment, and materials in a safe manner for which the purpose they were provided. We have resources as a company. If you feel that our tools are not satisfactory, please tell your supervisor, and we will purchase the tool that is right for the job. We do not want people to using tools for purposes they are not designed for. That is how tools fail. If you have a concern, talk to your supervisor first. Our staff want the Regal to be as safe as possible. If you find the supervisor is unwilling to make the changes recommended, we have an occupational health and safety committee member from each department, so you are directly working with them. That list can be found in the lunchroom or in the safety board by the change area. If you find the committee isn't dealing with the situation, then talk to the employer. The owner does tours once a month through the plant. And then finally, you can contact the occupational health and safety officer, which is the province, and they'll do an investigation into your concern at our business. Safety is the law, penalties for non-compliance. So the province can fine an individual up to $20,000 for not following the health and safety regulations. There's a $1.5 million fine for a death for a company and $500,000 fine for an individual. So if the supervisor or manager causes a situation where there's a fatality that can occur, federal, there's up to 2 years in jail. You can be criminally charged for fatalities. This is from the West Ray coal disaster, where there was a lack of supervision and planning, the result of resulted in workers dying, that led to the federal criminal system charges. I always bring up Saskatchewan youth. People that are 14 to 25 years old are the most likely to be injured on the job. That's a few reasons. One, young workers don't have as much experience. They're more likely to take risks, and they're more likely to follow instructions that are unsafe. So there's a bunch of reasons. So if we look at it, in just 3 years across Canada, 100 workers under the age of 25 died in Canada in just 3 years. So want to make sure that never happens at Regal. So we have to make sure that we are looking after our employees that are just entering the industry. So jobs with the most injuries: retail, hospitality, and construction. Manufacturing is not on this list, but that's also because most Saskatchewan youth are not involved in manufacturing. There's way more people working in stores or in construction than in manufacturing. So we want to make sure that number stays low for our industry as well. Exposure to harmful substances, chemicals, and environment. At Regal, we handle a bunch of different chemicals in making the barbecues, so we have to make sure young people know the dangers of that, and that is why WMIS is provided after this orientation session. Drugs and alcohol. No drugs or alcohol are allowed on Regal property that are intoxicating. If you have a prescription drug, that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Please talk to HR if you're taking a new prescription drug that can affect your behavior at work. Employees can be asked to take a drug and alcohol test, and that's in agreement with the union at our site. Refer to the employee manual for the specific details regarding this policy. This is very unusual for organization to request this. Workplace accidents. The most common workplace accidents are kind of common things. It is fatigue, being tired at work, very stress, slipping on water or oil, tripping on items. There's been incidents at our facility of people tripping on broken pallets and people not cleaning up the broken pallet material, toppling objects. I always call toppling objects the broken toaster effect or broken coffee maker effect. People don't throw stuff out. They put it up on a really high shelf and it's precariously perched, and then our forklifts are heavy with a lot of steel rattling along, and then the item falls down. Hazardous material, people are handling paints or other cleaning solvents for the metals and don't know what the risks are and then cause damage to themselves. Repetitive motion, so again, we have cutting, steel over and over again, lifting. People should not be lifting stuff that's more than 50 pounds by hand. Always get a second person, or we have lifting hoists, we have power vacs, we have a bunch of different lifting equipment that if you're trained to use it, use it. And if you're not trained to use it, ask a worker that is trained to use it to help you lift stuff. Workplace violence, people confronting themselves at the workplace. And then in the parking lot, we've had incidents with collisions with either a forklift hitting a car or cars hitting each other. So again, when we have a lot of workers leaving at the end of the shift, be very cautious about leaving the parking lot because we have pedestrians walking through the parking lot and we also have other vehicles in the parking lot at that time. So we'll go through the safety rules. All employees must follow Regal policies and safety rules. Do not operate any equipment if you're unsure about the operation of it or have never been signed off for it. Other companies' training is not valid at Regal. So if you've ran forklifts before at another company, that's awesome. We would like you to run it with one of our trained operators, just because there's so many different types of forklift training, so much different types of forklifts. We want to make sure everyone stays safe. And we have a health and safety trainer that will run through the theory with you and then do the practical. Only staff with approved training may operate overhead cranes, aerial lifts, brakes, and forklift trucks. I use the example of the forklifts, but really overhead cranes, aerial lifts, brakes, and forklifts are all going to be the same where you need training for that. Never remove or disable safeguards. They're there for a reason, to make sure our hands don't get into the equipment. Smoking and vaping must take place in designated smoking areas. We also have a smoking plan. So after you've worked here for 6 months, talk to HR about the health and safety help we have through our employment assistance plan for getting people off smoking and vaping. Do not lift items by yourself if they weigh more than you can handle, awkward in nature. So a good rule is 50 pounds per item. You don't want to have your back thrown out from working here and lifting stuff that's too heavy. We have equipment for this. Food is not allowed on the shop floor. All drinks must have lids. With the welding dusts and stuff, we have particulates in the air that can go in the food, and then you're contaminating the food. The following personal protective equipment must be worn on the shop floor. Safety glasses. For certain tasks, it's mandatory to wear a respirator, like cutting the stainless steel metal, wearing a face shield, in addition to safety glasses. So whenever we're doing any metal cutting, you have to wear a face safety shield. Regal has had almost no eye injuries since we've mandated using face shields on top of safety glasses. You will also be fit tested with safety glasses at the end of this training session. Personal shoplift use is prohibited. Our shop is for making barbecues for our customers, not for personal use. Areas where students are forbidden. So sometimes we have different students from different schools come through for tours. We cannot let them go into certain areas, so we have to keep them separated from some of the production areas, like paint. All cases of injury, no matter how slight, must be reported to the first aid attendant and your supervisor. All injured staff are required to participate in the Regal's return to work program. Harassment will not be tolerated. Allegations of harassment will be investigated. So what is harassment? According to the Saskatchewan Employment Act, discrimination based on race, creed, religion, color, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, disability, physical size or weight, age, nationality, ancestry, or place of origin is against the law. Unwanted touching, direct or implied threats, unwelcome jokes are the common forms of harassment, and they will not be tolerated at Regal. Keep all work areas and walkways clean. Again, it takes skill to trip over flat surfaces. Really, the last 5 minutes at the end of the shift, please clean up your work area. A lot of trips, slips, and falls can be prevented by having clean work areas. And because we have multiple shifts, the next shift is coming on to a clean workstation. Report unsafe conditions to your supervisor or the occupational health and safety representative or the officer immediately. We'll rectify them. Report all property damage to your supervisor. We want to make sure that the building is in good condition and also all the equipment's in good condition. Report all events where you could have been hurt but were lucky. Often, those situations where you're lucky, the next person isn't lucky, so we have to kind of think of why this has occurred and make sure it doesn't have the possibility of happening again. Floor workers are not allowed to use cell phones in the shop areas. There's a couple of reasons for this. We do not want people taking photographs of our shop area for intellectual property reasons. The other thing is it's a health and safety concern. Also, we want to make sure your phones don't get damaged in the shop area. We have a lot of things moving around, and also it's not required for the job. If you are expecting an urgent phone call, that person can phone the front desk and the message will be relayed to you. Shop instructions you shouldn't wear jewelry except for stud earrings and watches. The reason for this is we work with some very large magnets for moving equipment, and you don't want to find out that there was iron in your earrings by having them ripped out. Not to be too graphic. Other things like silver and gold are very soft, so they bend very easily. We don't want to have a degloving issue. I'm not going to include a photo of that, but if you have a thing like a ring pinch your finger because of your handling steel, the ring can cut off the blood flow to your finger, and the finger can also be removed because if the steel grabs onto the ring, it can be extremely unpleasant. So no things like jewelry on the production floor. Long hair must be tied up. Again, we don't want to have long hair pulled into any of the machines, and all the other stuff that's attached to the hair pull into the machines. And then only use tools for their intended purpose. Only use ladders on dry, balanced ground. Do not work on the top 2 rungs of ladders. Keep extension cords from running across high traffic areas. If you're finding that you're having to use one extension cord that's very far away from where you're working all the time, let the maintenance department know. We can put in a new plug closer to where you work. Also, if you're finding our ladders not tall enough, tell us. Maintenance can buy taller ladders or scaffolding. There's a variety of options for that. Just as a quick review at Regal, there isn't a rule for every bad idea, right? Like, so obviously this photo is not at Regal, but it just shows we do not want to put ourselves in these situations. Like, just because there's not a rule doesn't mean you shouldn't think about each situation you're putting yourself in. We all want to go home safe every day. Discipline procedure for not following the safety rules. Depending on the seriousness of the infraction, steps can be skipped. So if you forget to wear PPE or something, maybe it'll be coaching, like, hey, remember, like, you have to wear this in that situation. It could be a formal verbal warning where it's written up, written warning where these are going into your files. It could be a 1-day suspension without pay from work. It could be multiple days suspension, up to 10 days, or up to the termination of employment at Regal, which we don't want to have happen for any of our employees. So those are kind of the things. Outside agencies, occupational health and safety officers can also fine workers and Regal for not wearing PPE. And Regal can be fined for a bunch of different reasons from occupational health and safety officers, but workers specifically can be fined under the summary offense tickets. And it's similar to a speeding ticket from the police. The worker can get a fine for $250 for not wearing PPE correctly or not at all. And then Regal will get a 10 times that fine. So, and the supervisor can as well. Basic personal protective equipment provided at Regal is safety glasses, and there's 8 different types. You'll be fit tested for which one fits you best at the end of this presentation or after WMIS. Hearing protection, there's these 3M stands in the lunchroom, by the change room, and in the different production areas in case people need replacements. Hard hats have to be used when operating the cranes. Leather gloves have to be worn when you're moving sharp objects. When yard workers are working in the yard or office staff are walking through the production area, they have to wear a reflective jacket, and that's just to reduce the likelihood of a collision by a car or forklift. Bum caps are good when you're working underneath low areas. It's good to mention these just really quickly. They look like baseball caps, but they have a plastic coating underneath. So if you bump your head on something sharp, like the edge of a barbecue, you won't cut your head open. Employee must purchase safety boots. One thing we found is some of our staff require glasses, and they don't like having their normal glasses with the outside safety glasses over. They often don't fit very well. So we do have safety glass inserts. You have to take these to Superstore or another type of optician. For about $120, you can have these steel inserts fitted with your prescription, and then they clip into the safety glasses. And then so as the safety glasses get all scratched up, you can pop out the inserts and then replace a new one. And you can get reimbursed for the $100 after 6 months of employment. All PPE should be inspected by the user prior to use. So in the photos, there's a harness and there's a respirator, but really any of our equipment, so our hard hat, take a quick look to make sure it's not cracked, if it was dropped. Any kind of that stuff can happen over time, and when you go to use it, you want to make sure it's working properly. Things like respirators, the seals can go on them. If somebody else used your harness, is it in really good condition? Supervisors have the legal responsibility to ensure PPE is being stored and used properly. eyewash stations, most SDSs, so the chemical guidance sheets there, the safety data sheets, recommend washing your eyes for 20 minutes or longer after contact. This is important because if you only wash your eyes out for a couple of minutes and start going to the hospital, it could take up to 10 minutes to get to the hospital. And that 10 minutes, the chemicals reacting with your eye and causing permanent damage. So you want to use either our safety eye wash stations or showers and wash it out. Some younger workers in particular are concerned about making a mess on the floor. Don't be. We have maintenance people and we also have other staff, like the safety officer is more than willing to mop up this eye wash station's contents if there's a situation where it's required to be used. These eye wash stations are also inspected every month, and every 6 months, the eye wash station that's yellow has its contents replaced and a stabilizing agent's put in to make sure the water is good for use. First aid, each location has to have 2 people trained in first aid. So each station that we have, because our facility is quite spread out, we have first aid stations at every location. We also have them in the copy or lunchroom. And then we also have logbooks, and we also have it on the computer system to make sure that we're figuring out what the root cause of these injuries are, right? So a minor scratch that was a lucky situation, we want to make sure that it doesn't turn into something more severe. Workers going on the shop floor must be fit tested. So we want to make sure that you're fit tested. And again, at the end of this presentation, we'll fit test all workers for eyeglasses in case you are safety glasses in case you go on the shop floor. Workers that are handling chemicals or welders, we are going to do a fit test with a respirator. As a note, as our barbecues are being made, they're welded together. So welding can cause damage to your eyes because of the exposure to ultraviolet rays. One of the most common things is called welder's flash, and it's kind of not named perfectly because it's usually the welder that doesn't get it. It's the person walking by. You watch the welder while they're welding. The UV rays hit your eye and actually cause your eyes to hurt, and it feels like there's sand at the back of your eyes, and it takes days for that to go away. Also, if you're standing by somebody who's welding, the UV rays can cause like the worst sunburn of your life. So if you're standing around people welding, you want to have your arms covered. If you're a welder, you have to have your arms covered. But that's in the welding course. Harmful effects of overexposure to noise. So we always want to make sure people see this. So ideally, you want to have your earplug in so far that the safety officer, when they walk by to give you heck for not wearing earplugs correctly, they see that, oh, it actually is in there. If the safety officer, when he's walking through and doing his inspections, sees them like this, they're going to talk to you and tell you that the earplugs aren't really doing very much. It's like a fashion accessory if they're hanging out and they can see them across the shop floor. So really what you're supposed to do is roll the earplug and then stick it in. So if you see the photo in figure B, the plug is kind of narrow, and that means it's like pushed into the ear canal. So our shop floor can be quite loud. Usually it's between 90 and 100 decibels on the shop floor. And if we take a look at that, about a quarter of workers then, if they're not wearing hearing protection, will lose their hearing. If guys are really pounding on the metal for whatever reason, there's an issue, and they're not wearing earplugs, they can have pain and discomfort, and actually 160 decibels, you can have a ruptured eardrum. So kind of really quickly, it doesn't sound like a big difference, like 80, 85 to 100, like, oh, that's only 15. But really, because it's an exponential system, is that 82 to 85 decibels, which we look on here, it goes from 16 to 8. And then 85 to 88 is half and half and half again, right? So because it's an exponential system, 3 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually half as much exposure. So we said that with our shop floor can be up to 100 decibels. So you're only allowed to be on the shop floor for 15 minutes before you can have hearing damage. So you need to wear the hearing protection. Fire extinguishers are usually next to the emergency exits. Where in a fire should you aim the extinguisher? You should always aim it at the base of the fire. And then when should a fire not be put out? And if the fire is bigger than you, that's putting out a lot of smoke, a lot of heat. Smoke is actually how most people die from fires. Is leave the building and the fire sprinkler system should kick on. If not, that's why we have a fire department, right? Like, you don't want to put yourself at risk if a fire's that big. Also, because we handle chemicals on site, if you're not wearing the right respirator for that chemical with fire, it can be very bad for your long-term health. So fire extinguishers and eye stations inspections, I mentioned this earlier. So we inspect these once a month to make sure the eye wash stations are in good condition and have water in them. And for the eye wash stations that have free flowing water, make sure the water condition is good, making sure the fire extinguishers have not been used and that they are off the ground and in good condition is what the safety officer does. One thing we like to mention is we do have paraffin oil on site for some of the wood that's on some of the barbecues. You have to use a special container for this. And those rags, if you're cleaning up the paraffin oil, if like there's a spill, you have to put them in the just right containers. What will happen is the rags will spontaneously catch fire. As it degasses, the rag will get very hot and then it'll catch on fire. Fire drills. We have a fire drill once every 12 months at every location. Please head to the muster point for the head count. The health and safety personnel will tell you when it's safe to return to the job site. Equipment pre-use inspections. We have equipment pre-use inspections for all equipment. So cranes, airlifts, paint and blast equipment, electric pallet jack and brakes have to be inspected prior to use every shift. So before the operator turns it on and drives off, you have to make sure it's in good condition to drive off. These forms act as proof the equipment was in good working order in case something happens. Start of shift site inspections. Workplaces with significant dangers, such as Regal BBQs, have to have site inspections done at the start of the shift. Because our workflow changes all the time based on what models we're making, we have to identify the risks at the start of the shift and talk about it with workers, and then to have a record of that, we pass around the form at the start of the shift, and then workers initial next to their printed name that they were there and agreed to. What to have to do if there's an incident. Supervisor detail what happened. This is not a severe incident. The OH&S committee investigators detail all the causes of the incident as well as recommendations, and then the last section of the report is for the managers to respond. All incidents that are reported are investigated. The form is on Access Global, which is our internal database. Contact John, the health and safety officer for this location, if you do not feel comfortable in completing the form. He will provide training. Employee injuries. Report injury to the supervisor as soon as possible. While recovering from your injury, you will be asked to participate in the return to work program. A return to work program is sometimes called disability management program. It's a clearly developed plan to accommodate a work-related disability in the workplace, providing alternate or modified work for injured workers. By getting a worker back to work as soon as medically safe, the physical and emotional impact for that worker and the worker's family and other employees is reduced. It's of note, if you're on WCB, you do not receive your full pay. So you receive a portion of your full pay up to a certain amount, right? So like things like overtime, extra hours, and all that are not eligible under WCB. So if you're prone to working a lot of overtime on bonuses and all that kind of stuff, you do not receive those in WCB. Critical incident response plan. If an emergency happens, call 911, call the vice president responsible for the area as soon as possible, which would be vice president of manufacturing in most cases. Critical incident response team will be responsible for outside communication with the media. Every person involved with the incident will be offered support and follow up with check-ins. You do not discuss the incident or admit fault with third parties involved. So this would be a good example would be if forklift operator accidentally hit the car, like a parked car out in front of our building. Do not admit fault and like apologize a lot. Just say like, we'll have to talk to the supervisor and do it that way. I'm sure you feel guilty about the incident, but admitting guilt can have legal ramifications, and especially if it turns out it wasn't necessarily the forklift operator's fault. So employees must notify their supervisor when injured. Even when it's a minor cut, things can escalate. It doesn't hurt to tell people, and there's a record of it. Maybe it's a situation, again, like with a cut, maybe it's our gloves we got a poor shipment of gloves, so we should go back to the supplier and look into that. Supervisor or the designated will accompany the injured worker to the nearest medical center if required. Supervisor will have a package for injured employee with the corresponding forms. So the WCB W1 and E1 forms would be in that package. Supervisors must review the emergency response plan with all new employees because each section of the building is different. Employees must know where the muster point for the location is, and site managers should keep a printed copy for quick reference in case there actually is an emergency. For all staff, sound the alarm verbally and pulling the wall mount. A lot of people don't like yelling out what the emergency is, but yell out what the emergency is. Turn off equipment, close doors. If in case of a fire, we want to cut off the oxygen to the fire. Exit in a calm fashion through the closest exit. Use stairs instead of the elevators. If an employee is unable to walk down the stairs, the staircases are fire rated for 2 hours, so they can stay in the staircase and they will be fine for 2 hours. And the fire department can help the employees get down the stairs. Proceed to the muster point for head count. Stay clear of emergency personnel. Remain at the muster point. We also have a cold weather muster point, which is 2 businesses down from us on the north side. And they have agreed that if there's a fire in our business, we can go into their shop until the emergency is cleared off. Automated external defibrillator, we have these on site. Just a quick public health things is it's always good to make sure these things are charged. So again, when you're doing the monthly inspections for the fire extinguisher, we have to also do these for the AED. This can be used if someone has a heart attack to revive them. So you have to make sure the batteries are charged. All first aid staff are trained how to operate the machine, but in a real emergency, the AEDs are designed for anyone to use. Working alone. Working alone means you can't be heard or seen. So that could be working at the front desk, or it could be working as a maintenance person fixing something. You could be working alone. When traveling, always tell people with Regal BBQs, always traveling, let somebody know where you're going and when you should return in case there's an emergency, because we do distribute our products across all of Western Canada and the United States. Our salespeople travel a lot. And then again, employees should not be using Regal properties outside of business hours due to there not being any help available. So if you're using our tools and you're working by yourself and then something happens and no one knows you're there, you could be really hurt for a long period of time before getting help. The role of the Occupational Health and Safety Committee to participate in the identification and control health and safety hazards. They have to investigate all incidents. They have to be involved in the right to refuse to work, which was earlier in the course, to receive, consider, and help resolve matters respecting the health and safety of workers. And then they have to complete a site walkthrough every 3 months and complete a site inspection form with the safety officer. This 2015 will be taught after this course, but it doesn't hurt to go over it once really quickly. So WHMIS 2015 has some new symbols, some new labeling requirements, and that will be talked about in that course. We also have to have a maximum chemical quantity for each site. So if you're bringing in more chemicals of a certain site, we have to add that to the master list. And then really quickly again, we have the exclamation mark and the guy with the chest exploding and the dead fish are the new symbols. So this is an eye skin irritant is the exclamation mark. The guy with the chest exploding could be cancer or birth defect. And then the dead fish is an environmental thing. And those are the new symbols for WHMIS 2015. Chemical spills. In the paint section of the building, they have to worry about this quite a bit, is try and report the spill to supervisors and get help. Don't try and handle an oil drum spill by yourself. Put on the correct PPE, which will probably involve a respirator and a spill kit gown. And then also we have a drum with berms that we can put up to prevent the spill from spreading. Control the spill with our chemicals, neutralize the chemical, allow it to ventilate. A lot of gases will be coming off the spilled chemicals, clean up, disposal, and then we'll do an instant investigation. There is actually a safe operating instruction for how to do a chemical spill in the paint area that goes into this in a lot more detail. Please review that before you handle chemicals. Chemical disposal. We want to make sure Regal BBQs is a environmentally responsible company, so all of our waste chemicals are properly disposed of. Do not put them down the toilet or down the sink. We have a procedure for this as well. The SARC website also will tell us what chemicals they'll accept across Saskatchewan. Equipment training, talked about this a little bit earlier. So for all equipment training, there's a theory course, there's a practical assessment. For the cranes, you have to have 40 hours signed off of use, and then 16 hours for the other devices that you're a safe operator before you're labeled a competent operator at our organization. So again, you can, even if you've used equipment at another location, you must still take the theory course, because it might have been a long time ago you took that. And there's so many different companies and so much training, we can't keep track of that. And then we have to have a practical assessment of that you're a competent user of the equipment. And then we have to have 40 hours for the crane, 16 hours for other devices. Lockout tagout procedure. So if equipment's locked out or tagged out, you have to make sure it's not messed with or the tag being cut off. Only competent maintenance staff or operators can lock and tag out equipment. For hand tools, if your hand tool or battery pack isn't working properly, just unplug from the wall or remove the battery pack. This is a really common hand injury when we're drilling out holes for the BBQs, is people try to change out the bits, they forget to unplug it, or they forget to take out the battery pack, and then they bump it, and then they put a bit in their hand. De-energize it. Maintenance and repair of equipment. Steps are taken immediately to protect the health and safety of any person who may be at risk until the defect is corrected. Defects are corrected by a competent person as soon as reasonably practicable. Email the facilities group with building issues. Forklifts. Pedestrians must give way to forklifts. Drivers cannot often see pedestrians, so you can easily see the forklift. They might not be able to see you, especially between pallets of and completed BBQs. All staff on the floor must wear green safety vests to help operators see you. Always wait for eye contact before proceeding. So the forklift operator will give you a little nod that he saw you before letting go. Ergonomics is the science of matching the job to the worker. So what we don't want to have is really tall workers working hunched over and really short workers reaching up um, because it's so uncomfortable. So we want to have the workstation tailored to the individual worker so they don't have issues. Um, the desk setup, just a quick explanation of that. Um, you want to have all of your joints in neutral positions. Have your display a foot and a half to 2 feet away from your eyes. You want to have your knees and your elbows at 90 degrees, and then have your back set up straight, and then have the chair pan about 20 inches from the ground. So carpal tunnel syndrome has been an issue in the past for some employees that work in finishing and in the office area. So what we're trying to do is have people rotate positions so they're not doing as much of the repetitive tasks. So they do some of it, but not the whole day. Some things like how we're holding our tools, how we're entering data into the keyboards. So hitting the keys even less hard can reduce carpal tunnel. And then also like what kind of mouse we're using. So the health and safety officer does a walkthrough once a year to make sure all the desks in the office area and supervisor offices are set up correctly. Proper lifting, almost all staff are going to be lifting items. Always bend with the knees. If you see the diagram, by bending down without using the knees, you're actually putting 10 times the force onto your back. So if you imagine picking up a 100-pound box and you're bending like this, 1,000 pounds on your back, well, there's a high chance you could throw out your back. So always bend with the knees. That's the end of our presentation. Are there any questions before your quiz? The references for this presentation was the Saskatchewan regulations, Saskatchewan Employment Act, and the Practical Loss Control Guide.